Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, and welcome to this week's show for the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast. I'm pleased to be joined. Returning to the show is Matthew Ho, who is with the Eisenhower Media Network. You also might know him as a former Marine and a former State Department a person and a dissenter, well-known dissenter who is outspoken against war. And I welcome him back to the show. Thank you, Matthew.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. Thanks for
And
having me back on.
hopefully, there are those out there that have caught some of your fine appearances with the judge, Andrew Napolitano. And then also, I know you do Daniel Davis, former, is it lieutenant colonel or colonel?
Lieutenant Colonel. Lieutenant Colonel.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, who is a kind of whistleblower himself as well.
Right.
And so it's good to have you. And just want to up top say you're joining me not only because it is about a year since we've seen the violence from the US and Israel expand and expand and expand in the Middle East. We've just been watching it steadily escalate. But in the past few weeks, we've seen that it now includes Lebanon. And the host of this show, we started this together, Rania Khalek. I've been thinking about her for much of the time for the past couple of weeks and how devastating this is for her and her friends and family. And wanted her to be part of the show to update you. But she's entirely overwhelmed. And so, Matthew, you were kind enough to step in and just help push the show along and cover what we'd like to, which most of what I have to share and discuss is from a US government perspective anyways. I'm not going to claim to understand Lebanese politics or even what the Lebanese people are going through any given day as they deal with Israel bordering them. But I want to, as we get started, play a clip for you from Rania. And I encourage you all to go watch this. This was done. CODEPINK hosted a conversation with her earlier in the week. She gave this thumbnail history of Lebanon and the resistance to Israeli aggression, spoke about the rise of Hezbollah. She has a very good understanding of Hezbollah that cuts through the propaganda from the US government. But also here she is. The clip that I really want to focus on is her describing what it has been like for the last 2 weeks in Lebanon. And I must say that we are recording on October 4th. This does not include what we saw happen in the last 24 hours, where apparently, according to Khaled Jaber, that 73 tons of bombs were dropped on Beirut's southern suburbs.
Right. Yeah, the
And
video from that
yeah,
is just astounding. It's shocking. It really is.
so this is Rania. This is about 3 minutes. I'll go ahead and just play this, and then I'm going to go to Matthew, and you can respond to what Rania had to say.
To the last couple of weeks, and the Israelis, with the backing of certain officials in the American government, we now know it was mostly spearheaded by Brett McGurk, who's Biden's special Middle East envoy, as well as Amos Hochstein, who's in it. Hey, I think he used to be Israeli. He's definitely served in the Israeli military, but he's an advisor to U.S. President Joe Biden. These two figures helped spearhead the U.S. support for Israel, turning its attention from its genocide in Gaza to its northern border to go after Hezbollah. The U.S., which is basically just a neocon government at this point, has decided that now is the time to try to take out all of their enemies in the region, starting with, Hezbollah. They think Hamas is defeated. So you saw the pager attacks, which was a form of terrorism. You saw the walkie-talkie attacks, which was a form of terrorism. You saw Israel flattening entire residential apartment buildings in Dahiyeh, the southern suburb of Beirut, where Hezbollah has a lot of support. And you just saw it escalate and escalate. Then Israel carpet bombed Lebanon, killing over 500 people in a single day last Monday. And then you saw what happened late last week when Israel dropped 85 bombs, including US supplied 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs to take out 6 apartment buildings to kill Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, which was a massive act of aggression. A million war crimes took place with that bombing alone. And you saw the most disgusting thing imaginable, which was Joe Biden and Kamala Harris both released statements calling that a form of justice when it annihilated the lives of probably hundreds of people. We still don't even know how many people were killed in that strike because so many people just like were evaporated by these bombs that you can't even collect bodies. And the attacks on Lebanon have continued. Even just now, before I started talking to you, I saw there was a 5th evacuation order in the middle of the night in Dahieh, in the southern suburb of Beirut, given to people by the Israelis to evacuate residential apartment buildings so that the Israelis can bomb them. So, I mean, just imagine, I know all of you, are opposed to war, but I mean, just imagine the barbarity of getting evacuation orders in your own home at 3 a.m. in the morning. Hopefully you wake up and see it. I don't even know where you're supposed to see it. And you leave your house and the Israelis just get to destroy it and you lose everything you've worked for your entire life. That is, if you're able to escape with your life. That is the situation in Lebanon every single day, every single night. We are seeing the scenes of Gaza replay in Lebanon. 1 million people have been displaced in the last almost 2,000 people have been killed. We're looking at 50 to 100 people in Lebanon being slaughtered every single day, entire families in their homes. It's just, completely devastating. And personally for me, I obviously, all of us have been heartbroken over Gaza over the last year, and I've cried many times. But there's just something so much more visceral about watching this happen to your own home and your own friends and your own family. And I'm just horrified. I'm completely horrified.
So Matthew, go ahead.
Oh, it's heartbreaking, of course. When you have that personal connection with someone, when you know someone and you see what they're going through. And I am so amazed with Rania's ability to do her work professionally, to do her work brilliantly with all of this occurring. I'm having a hard time with it. I know, Kevin, you are, folks watching it, and we're disconnected from it, right? We're removed from it. And to see someone like Rania and understand what must be going on for her personally in all of this, but for her to still do her work, to do her job as a journalist is really exemplary. I can't give her enough credit for that. She made so many key points in those brief couple minutes. I think one of the things, that just to maybe expand on a couple of things she touched on, this invasion into Lebanon, or the escalation in Lebanon, these incursions, these raids into Lebanon, certainly the airstrikes, and most importantly, the killing of Hassan Nasrallah. The timing, many reasons for the timing of it. But one of the key reasons is because the October 7th anniversary is coming up. And the idea was that this will distract from October 7th. This will shift the focus from the hostages still being in Gaza, from the genocide in Gaza ongoing, from questions about October 7th being asked, because everyone will be focused in on Lebanon. And then as an October 7th anniversary atonement gift, if you will, Netanyahu was going to present Nasrallah's head on a platter to the Israeli people, because Nasrallah, of course, big boogeyman for the Israeli public. So Rania touched on that, and I think it's important. She also touched on, of course, what we know about the Americans urging the Israelis on, and this was a story from, I think it was September 30th in Politico, that really outlined this, particularly the role of Brett McGurk and Amos Hochstein, who are the two most senior officials for the White House with regards to Middle East policy. And essentially Politico, talking to many people, both on record and off record, essentially confirming that, look, the Americans have been saying, we want a ceasefire. We're working towards a ceasefire. But the reality is they're telling the Israelis to go forward with their military operations. And there's one particular quote in that Political article, which is both nauseating and fascinating, because it is so fantastical. It is so unreal. This idea that McGurk and Hochstein are saying to the Israelis, go invade Lebanon because we believe this will make things better in the long run, your invasion of Lebanon, right? Just incredibly fantastical, just a fabulous type of ahistorical grip on reality that these people have. And you have to understand that this is who is in power. I mean, one of the things that you'll hear in the American commentary about the killing of Nasrallah, and Rania touched on this as well, was statements from the president, from the vice president, celebrating Nasrallah's death as some form of justice. And of course, if you push them on it, they'll say, oh, it's because of the Marines that were killed in 1983 in Lebanon. Well, first of all, that's more than 40 years ago. But this idea that Nasrallah was the one responsible for that when he was 22 years of age at that point, let alone Hezbollah had just barely been created at that point. Not saying they weren't involved, but the understanding of that Hezbollah didn't exist prior to the Israeli invasion and occupation that began in 1982, which was the reason why the U.S. Marines were there in the first place, because of that invasion and occupation to support Israel, in the guise of bringing about stability and peace, but still to support Israel. So, you have these articles of faith within Washington, D.C. that are, again, ahistorical and fabulous. And one of those being that Nasrallah had blood on his hands for our 240 Marines that were killed there. Simply not true, not the case. But it's an article of faith that sustains their narrative, and that narrative is what completely informs our policy. And I don't know how many people in the American Congress, how many people in the Pentagon, at the CIA, at the State Department, the White House, even know that Hezbollah only came into existence as a result of Israel's invasion. Not many, I can tell you that. One thing, Kevin, I think that shocks people, surprises people. I can tell you this from my own experience in Afghanistan and Iraq. The percentage of American military officers, intelligence officers, diplomats, and so forth who went to Afghanistan and Iraq, who actually read books about those countries before they went, single digit percentage. And that's what you have. You have an ahistoric, ignorant, fabulous mindset in Washington, D.C. that enables them to say things like, go ahead, Israel, go invade Lebanon, because it's going to make the world a better place.
Yeah. And just as they did with Hamas, everything is Hezbollah owned. It's like Hezbollah medical facility, Hezbollah road, Hezbollah tower, Hezbollah media facility. And so, but it doesn't work as it does with Hamas, because the understanding that I have obtained, thanks to, I have to credit Rania Khalek, is that this is a organization that has been elected to parliament and it is designated as a terrorist organization by the US government, but that isn't how every country in the world views this resistance militia. And also, it is the only group in Lebanon that can protect the Lebanese people from the kind of warfare, or to fight back against the kind of warfare. So I'll play, before we move on from Rania, one more clip of her, which I didn't know this. And that's why I'm grateful that I have this connection to Rania, because I didn't know what she outlined about the lack of a Lebanese military in the country. And people should understand that if you're looking at this and you're saying, why doesn't somebody come out and help the people in Lebanon? She answers this question.
Lebanon does have an army, the Lebanese army, but it is funded and armed by the U.S. The U.S. does not, it gives it hand-me-downs, like hand-me-down guns, hand-me-down armored personnel carriers, and a couple hand-me-down helicopters. And actually, the U.S. acts as an obstacle. It actually intervenes in Lebanese politics to prevent Lebanon from purchasing weapons from any other country. The U.S. has actually stepped in and prevented the Lebanese government at times from purchasing weapons from the Russians. WikiLeaks cables showed that. So the Lebanese army is basically kind of just like a jobs program for people to, hold guns and police traffic, which is really unfortunate, because in a situation like this, what you saw yesterday, if you were following the news as closely as I was, because I'm just kind of glued to the news right now. The Lebanese army, as the Israelis were announcing that they are going to invade, the Lebanese army withdrew from areas of the south that it's in because it doesn't have the capacity to fight Israel, and that is not its mandate. That is why Hezbollah exists. I mean, there's all this talk about we have to disarm Hezbollah. You know, Hezbollah's weapons are what threaten Lebanon, and Lebanon should have its own army. Lebanon should have its own army. The problem is its sovereignty is violated by the U.S. on behalf of Israel to prevent Lebanon from having a functioning army that can protect it. And that is why Hezbollah, made up of Lebanese people from the south, from the area of Lebanon that is under threat of constant invasion and occupation by the Israelis, they have taken it upon themselves to take up arms and align themselves with countries like Iran, who will supply them with weapons to defend their land and their homes from Israel. That, I mean, it's as simple as that. It's not that difficult to understand. You know, we would all do the same thing if we were living in a threatening environment where somebody was trying to invade our land and steal our homes and kill our families.
Spot on. I mean, you see this throughout the world. The United States, the empire of the United States, uses a tried and true means of divide and conquer. This is what empires have done throughout history. And the reality is, though, because people are able to better reach across boundaries now, reach across time zones, and connect with one another and work with one another, receive assistance from one another, it doesn't work so well. And you see this over and over again when the United States, whether it's itself or its proxies, engage in that type of divide and conquer behavior. What you have is you have those who are on the wrong side of that, who are on they're going to reach out for help wherever they can get it. And so, case in point, say in Iraq, where you go in, you divide and conquer, you're going to pit the Sunnis versus Shia, and the Sunnis are on the wrong end of that equation. Well, who are the Sunnis going to turn to? They end up turning to Al-Qaeda. And you see the reverse of that happen in Iraq starting in 2006, when we actually start talking to the Sunnis and saying, what's the problem here? Start listening to them, and oh, wow, you actually do have legitimate grievances. You were occupied, you were usurped. You're now on the heel of foreign occupation, under the heel of foreign occupation, as well as a predatory and corrupt Shia government in Baghdad. Okay, we can do something about it. And when we did that and spoke to them, they abandoned, they gave up Al-Qaeda in Iraq. But then in 2013, 2014, actually beginning 2012, when things have reversed and the predation came back on the Sunnis by the Shia, they had no one to turn to. They turned to the Islamic State. I mean, so you see kind of, I can give examples in Africa, I can give examples in Afghanistan, of where this type of divide and conquer strategy has this ultimate effect of forcing a people to find help from wherever they can. And so to Rania's point there about the relationship with Hezbollah and Iran, and certainly it's not only Hezbollah's relationship with Iran is certainly only not because they are desperate from help and they're willing to take it from others. There's ideological, worldview, metaphysical similarities that that cause them to be allies. But certainly her points there are extremely well said and completely not understood and not taken by the U.S. The U.S. empire.
So as we move through the devastation from now and reaching back all the way to the response of Israel after Hamas's attack, which was entirely preventable based on the reporting that we have now, there's, I think, a range of opinions that are valid, and if you're willing to believe that it was somehow allowed to happen, or there was total negligence on the part. I mean, at best, there's negligence.
Right.
Um, if you think that there's something more nefarious going on, they let it happen so that they could justify all of what we've seen unfolding, which these are the dreams of a settler colonial state.
Right.
And I can hear Rania in my head. I know that this is the kind of things. These are the plans that you have lying in a filing cabinet, and you pull out when you go, oh, this is the moment. This is the crisis. We can now put this in action. All right. So let me go to the uh, Reuters article that has described what we've been sending to the Israeli military. This comes from June. And also, I have to credit this reporter on this article. Her name is Humaira Pamuk, and she has an incredible report that we might be able to get to before we end. But I want to reach back to June because this is an accounting of what was transferred by the US to the Israeli government from the end of October through to would have been probably the end of May. At least 14,000 MK84 2,000-pound bombs, 6,500 500-pound bombs, 3,000 Hellfire precision-guided air-to-ground missiles, 1,000 bunker buster bombs, 2,600 airdropped small diameter bombs, and then there are other munitions. But those are the ones that merit the most specific mentioning. And so tell us a little bit about this artillery.
Yeah, I mean, and just to update it a bit, one, we're not really entirely certain the full magnitude of it because the White House has gone to great extent to ensure that there's very little public record of what's occurring. So what they have done is that the Congress has set limits with arms transfers where above a certain dollar threshold, the Congress has been notified. So what the White House has done is they have split up these arms shipments to be below that threshold so that they don't have to notify Congress. They don't have to make a public record of this. So
Can I
the
stop you for
information,
just a second?
yeah.
And just work in here that that's mentioned in this report from Humaira, and that she says, and this is good that she makes this point, because I think what's been unfolding in Ukraine is helping to expose the true nature of US empire. Because
Yeah.
here it says, while the US provides detailed descriptions and quantities of military aid sent to Ukraine as it fights Russia, the administration has revealed few details about the full extent of US weapons and munitions sent to Israel.
Right, and that's the politics of it, right? They
Right.
want to go back 13 months, Kevin, and the Biden campaign's first reelection ad was Joe Biden going to Kyiv as a wartime president, right? Minute long, celebrating Joe Biden as a wartime president, and so they want to, of course, publicize all that we're doing to fight Vladimir Putin and tyrannical Russia and to defend democracy versus authoritarianism because Putin equals Trump. So the politics are clear. On the other side of it, with regards to what's occurring in terms of the shipments of weapons to Israel, it's the opposite. They want to diminish it because there have been political difficulties for the Democrats with this. They still believe that the best path forward, this is clear, has been to go with the Israel lobby, that the Israel lobby's money is more important than the 4 or 5 million progressive votes they might lose in the general election. That's been their calculation. They've stuck with it. The munitions shipments themselves, the weapons and equipment and vehicles. The most recent I have seen comes from the Times of Israel in August. They were celebrating the 500th American cargo plane that had landed in Israel with weapons, vehicles, munitions since October 7th. That's on top of 100 plus ships at the time. And when you do the math on that, you realize that there is an American weapons shipment arriving in Israel every 12 hours, essentially. And you're talking massive shipments. People, of course, cargo ships, absolutely huge. Not sure people understand how big our aircraft are either, our C-17s, our C-5s, the 747s that are chartered to fly these things over. So massive planes. And what the Times of Israel said that this comes to 50,000 tons of munitions provided to Israel since October 7th. And that was back in early August. That was 2 months ago. And we've heard reports that the U.S. government has sped up shipments to Israel in the last couple of months, anticipating this war in Lebanon, anticipating this larger war with Iran. I mean, so the details of this are purposely trying to be, and of course, you can get into issues of transparency. Certainly, what you and Rania talk about on this show, of course, about government secrecy, about the public's right to know what their government is doing, particularly when it's participating in a genocide, particularly when it's participating in aggression throughout the Middle East that could lead to a regional war, that could lead to all types of ungodly and unthinkable consequences. So, I mean, we want to talk about the weapons. Some of these weapons can be very precise, and we know this. We've seen the results of it with whether it's airdrop munitions, whether it's missiles fired from drones, whether it's surface-to-surface missiles. These things can be quite precise. They can hit the buildings they're determined to hit. We could hit cars with individual Hellfire missiles. The American military actually created a type of Hellfire missile where there's no, and the Hellfire missile is the missile that's most commonly used by our drones. And it has, I think normally, I have to say, about a 15-pound warhead on it. So about the size of an artillery shell, essentially, in terms of its capacity for its explosion. And I think I'm right about that. I have to double check. But in terms of, but that's the purpose of it, is really just to destroy one singular target, particularly, say, a vehicle. And we can, the United States, the Israelis, whoever, can put those Hellfire missiles through the windshield of a car. We saw this occur in Kabul during the American retreat when the American drone killed that entire family in Kabul, right? That Hellfire missile hit exactly where it needed to hit. I was going to say as well, they also have Hellfire missiles that don't have any explosive at all, that upon impact, they burst apart, and they have these, they call them, they call it like a ninja version. They have essentially these giant metal shards that disperse. So it's intended to limit the collateral damage, as it's called, civilian casualties. We saw that used when Ayman al-Zawahiri was killed in Kabul in 2022. That was used to kill him, and it very accurate and able to hit one particular apartment building through one particular window and kill one particular person. That's the capacity that the West has to kill. And so when you see the scale and the scope of the destruction in Gaza, what's currently underway in Lebanon, you know that this type of destruction is deliberate. You can also see, though, the way they utilize the precision to have this mass destruction. So they utilize the precision to ensure that they hit the school, to ensure that they hit the water treatment facility, to ensure that they hit the bridge. One of the things the Israelis are doing in Lebanon right now is they keep bombing the roads. Rania mentioned the evacuation orders that are being given. The Israelis issue evacuation orders for two reasons. None of them have to do anything. Neither of them have anything to do with humanitarian concerns. One is a preemptive public relations move to say, look what we're doing. We're giving the people notice. We care about them. We want them to get out of the way. Well, of course, any military wants civilians out of the way because civilians make things harder, particularly in a ground combat environment. Just people in the way are people in the way. But it's got nothing to do about caring about them or wanting to minimize casualties. It's to make your military operation smoother. The other side of it is once you've issued that evacuation order, that allows you to treat that area as a free fire zone. Anyone who is there can be killed. This is something that a lot of us realized was going to happen right away in Gaza, that all of Gaza was going to be a free fire zone. It was essentially going to be kill anyone that moves is going to be the policy. That was the policy in Gaza. It's heading that way in the West Bank, and certainly in Beirut and in Lebanon, we are seeing that unfold. And so once you issue that evacuation order, anyone who doesn't heed the evacuation order is a terrorist. Reminds me of the scene with the machine gun, the door gunner in the helicopter in Full Metal Jacket, when he says to, I'm blanking on the name of the actor in that film, Matthew somebody or other, somebody in the chat or in the comments will remind me. But, he says, how do you tell a difference between, this machine gunner is just mowing everybody down as they fly by, all these Vietnamese people working in the fields. And he says, well, how do you know who's VC? He says, those who run are VC. Those who don't run are well-disciplined VC. right? And that's the mindset. You just come up with a reason why it's okay to kill everybody. And that's essentially what we're seeing here. So you have these weapons that are very precise, can be utilized in precision, but also have massive firepower. So when you want to take out that particular mosque, when you want to destroy that particular residential building and not just kill the target, but kill everyone around them, because collective punishment is an integral part of Israeli war, Israel's conduct of war. The Dahia doctrine, as people are probably hearing about, Dahia, the neighborhood in Beirut that is being savagely bombed right now. This is where Hassan Nasrallah was killed, but being savagely bombed. The Israelis have a policy called the Dahia doctrine. And this goes back to 2006, when essentially they did the same thing in Beirut as they're doing now. The idea being that killing civilians is a military goal in and of itself, that we are going to punish the civilian population so hard that it will stop our adversaries from doing what they're doing, because the pain will be so great. This has been part and parcel of Israeli war policy since before its foundation. Israel was born in violence. It was born in terrorism. It was born in ethnic cleansing. And so the idea of civilians as military targets in and of themselves has been part of the Israeli war system throughout its existence. And so we're seeing that being fulfilled. And of course, the Americans are the ones providing them with the weapons to do exactly what they need to do. It's just not the weapons, Kevin. It also, too, is the software. So some really great reporting that has come out of the Israeli press on this, plus 972 magazine in particular, where we understand the basics of the Israeli artificial intelligence programs. The ones that we know of are called Gosper, Lavender, and Where's Daddy. Where's Daddy being the most heinous. The idea with the Where's Daddy artificial intelligence program is it tells the Israelis when to bomb a particular house or a building or a mosque or whatever, based upon when the target is there. So they identify, this is a Hamas commander, this is a Hezbollah commander. And under normal rules of war, under the laws of armed conflict, you would strike them when they are away from their family, their friends, their neighbors, right? But what the Where's Daddy program does is alerts the Israelis to when those Hamas or PIJ or Hezbollah members are with their families, are in their homes, so that you can kill both those Hezbollah, those resistance fighters, and their entire families. And those artificial intelligence programs are all made possible through Microsoft, through Google, through Meta, because the way the Israelis find people to kill is they dig into the WhatsApp and Facebook profiles of these people. You know, we just saw that Telegram very much involved in all of this. That when Pavel Durov was taken a prisoner in France last month or back in August, when it was, quite possibly the understanding is emerging that what he gave up were the keys to the Telegram messaging app. And that this is how the Israelis were able to find many of Hezbollah commanders, because they had access to their Telegram communications. And so all this killing, this brutal organized murder, this genocide is made possible by just not the American weapons companies, just not the American government, but also to the American technology company.
And I should say, before we move on from Matthew Miller, that deservedly so, he's developed this reputation. I don't know if you've seen his nickname. He is called Count Smirkula.
No, that is,
and
yeah.
if you and I can't not see it now. I could actually, if I wanted to just do entertainment or infotainment, I could just play clips and mock him for how he just has this kind of like imperialist Gordon Gekko aura to him,
Right.
where and everything he talks, he can't keep his face from having this smirk while he talks about the horror show we keep seeing unfold. It says a lot. Anyways, maybe let's pivot here, because I can't conclude without having you address where we are now that we've seen what Iran did over the
Right.
last week to strike at, it was an Israeli military base, correct?
Yeah, my understanding is 2 Israeli air bases and the Mossad headquarters, or were the 3 targets. You've heard things back and forth whether there are more or not, but that seems to have been those seems to have been the targets.
Okay, and I want to play a clip that people have found a lot of catharsis in watching because for a moment it seems like there might be a countervailing force to all of this that might contain what we're seeing. In other words, in my head, and I understand why I am so into this clip. I'm going to play it's an Iranian professor who's a
Mm,
spokesperson it's Mohammed Morandi who
yeah,
was on Sky News, and I think I know why it's cathartic. I might put it to you after we're done, but let me just I'm going to pull this up here and play it. And I'd like to play it in its entirety just because we don't see clips like this. They're so rare,
sure.
and it doesn't matter that he's not
Well,
going to
Professor
be
Mohammed Morandi.
it doesn't matter that he's going to never be invited back on Sky News again. This is what you should do when you go on these channels, especially if you're him, especially if you're from Iran and they're expecting you to just be a submissive individual as they acted. So this is a British, I believe Murdoch owned entity. And this is Saeed Mohammed Morandi responding to, I don't know this guy. I don't really care what his name is. He's behaving and playing his role.
Well, Mohammed Morandi from the University of Tehran joins us now. Thank you very much for being with us, Professor. I just wonder, first of all, what has Iran achieved by this attack on Israel? Very few of the missiles got through. It, in effect, failed. Many people are calling it a humiliation for Iran.
I think that's a lot of wishful thinking on behalf of you and your colleagues at Sky News. It was a massive blow to the Israeli regime. And the history of this conflict doesn't go back to last year. It is 76 years of ethno-supremacism, ethnic cleansing, and this is a racist regime that you support. What the problem is that you cannot recognize that the difference between you and us is that you support racism and racial hierarchy, and we reject it. And the Israeli regime, if they dare strike back at Iran, we will hit them much harder next time. We will beat them into submission.
Well, they will strike back, won't they? No sovereign country can put up with having 180 ballistic missiles fired at them. So they will hit back, they will hit hard, and they could well hit your nuclear facilities, your oil production installations. They could cause Iran serious damage.
Listen, instead of the rhetoric, be real, because you're misleading your own people. Iran has countless underground missile sites with hundreds of thousands of missiles across the country. They were made after the US invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan to deal with a potential war with the United States. So this puny regime, it is not a state, it is a colony. It is a racist, ethno-supremacist colony, which the people call themselves the chosen people. Unlike you, we do not believe in chosen people. And the Palestinian people on that land who've been displaced and pushed into Gaza and who've been slaughtered regularly over 76 years, we will not stand for that. All people in the whole of Palestine must be equal. The Israeli regime, if they strike Iran, we will hit them much harder next time. And they can pretend that they got away, but we hit them very hard last night. We hit their bases. And unlike the Israeli regime, which constantly carries out slaughter and genocide and is carrying out a Holocaust in Gaza, we struck their military targets because unlike you, we actually care about human rights. Not you.
I'm going to pause it there just because I want you to deal with Israel before we get to what he had to say about if the US strikes Iran. And I think it's fair to keep those separate, not because it makes a difference, like US is always supporting Israel, but because it does change how Iran responds, I think.
Yeah. So what we saw immediately after these ballistic missile strikes by Iran, which was a warning, the second warning following the warning they gave in April with their strikes in April. And it should be clear, see clearly, there is no intent to actually cause damage to the Israeli military, because the Israelis actually gave a warning. I mean, sorry, the Iranians gave a warning again. They gave 3 or 4 hours notice that they were going to do this to the Americans. So any Israeli troops on those bases were in bunkers. Their aircraft, the F-15s, F-35s, would have been in hardened bunkers, or they would have been or they would have been up in the air. And the Iranian purpose was not to cause damage, but to demonstrate their capability to do so. Also demonstrate their capability to penetrate the vaunted Israeli air defense systems. And if that many missiles got through with 3 or 4 or 5 hours of warning, how many missiles are going to get through with no warning? Those missiles take maybe 10 minutes to get from Iran to Israel. And so that's what the Iranians were saying, backing up what the professor is saying right there as well. If you want a war, you're going to get a war, and it's going to be horrific. I mean, for the Israelis, this is something Gideon Levy, the columnist at Haaretz, said last year after October 7th occurred. For a generation, for more than a generation, for decades, the Israeli experience of war has been their warplanes bombing things and their soldiers shooting teenagers with rocks. And that's essentially what the Israelis experienced in Gaza over the last year. There have been Israeli casualties in ground combat, but not as many as you might have suspected. Since October 8th, there's been about 2,500 Israeli soldiers wounded and about 350 or 400 killed. So a substantial number, but as well, though, not as many as you would expect. War in Lebanon will be completely different from the Israelis, and certainly a war with Iran will be completely different. And the idea, as the professor was saying, that Iran specifically is targeting military facilities and not civilian facilities shows the difference between the two countries, shows the difference between the two powers, shows the difference between the two alliances. So really, you can see what the West values, how the West talks about human rights, but carries out genocide, while the Axis of Resistance speaks about human rights and actually acts accordingly in their conflicts. But the Iranians have also said now that our phase of unilateral self-restraint is over. This is what they said to the Americans yesterday. And they also said that any nation that takes part in Israel's attack will be considered as an enemy of ours and will be responded to just as we respond to Israel. And they said with regard to Israel, all options are available to us, including attacking Israeli infrastructure with unconventional means. So certainly what's being presented, what's on the table here, is something that any serious thinking person would say, let's find another way. But that's not what we have here. We have in Israel a governing coalition that is finding these wars to be politically beneficial. If elections were held today in Israel, Netanyahu and his coalition would be back in power. The other aspect is that political benefit dovetails very well with the overall metaphysical, Zionist, militarist yearnings and desires of Israel. What is occurring right now for many in Israel is a fulfillment of their destiny, whether a modern destiny or a biblical destiny, right? So, and then for the Americans, you have this, you have the pressure from the Israel lobby, but you also have many true believers in Washington, D.C. They dominate the Republican Party, and they make up a huge chunk of the Democratic Party. Certainly you have that. I spoke about Hochstein and McGurk before, these people who believe that an Israeli invasion of Lebanon will make the Middle East a better place, so they believe this. And the only thing that's tempering the White House right now is the fact that if this war does occur, as people expect it to, then we'll have $8 a gallon gasoline, and Harris will lose in November. And that's what the restraint is coming from the White House. Otherwise, I think the White House will have gotten to the point where they say, we can't blink on this. We have to go with the Israelis. The madness that drives that is apocalyptic. But this is a place we're in, and I'm grateful for that professor from Tehran to speak the way he does to a Western journalist. And I also note that he gave a master class. People who are aspiring to do media, watch how he is just watch that video over and over again, see how he comports himself, see his poise, see how he holds himself, see how he responds. He just does a brilliant job. And one of the reasons why that video is getting circulated, it's viral on Twitter right now, or on X, or whatever we call it now.
Yeah, so there's like a minute and a half left that I want to play where he speaks to what the U.S. might do, which is important. I should say Morandi has been on this show, and that was thanks to Rania and her connection and getting him on here as a guest. So I'm familiar with his expertise.
War, or certainly a war between Israel and Iran, it could be a war that Iran loses. If Iran does lose that war, do you think that the current Iranian regime could survive a defeat? Because that is if what you say is right, and Iran is going to hit back even harder, that could be where this all ends up.
Iran will not hit back harder. Iran will hit back much harder. The head of the Iranian forces says Iran will target and destroy all of the Israeli regime's infrastructure. This was the tip of the iceberg. Iran will lose no war. The Israeli regime will. It is time for you and others to end your racism and to end your support for the superior race, and to accept that all people in Palestine have equal rights, and the Palestinian people have a right of return. Jews, Christians, and Muslims are equal. Unlike what you say, they are equal, and we will accept nothing less than that. The regime must go, and all people must be treated equally. Right. And if the only thing, there's no doubt that Israel will lose, but the only variable here is the United States. If the United States gets involved, have no doubt, the U.S. will be swept out of Iraq by the Iraqi resistance, and all its assets in the Persian Gulf will be destroyed. All those regimes that U.S. bases will be destroyed, and the oil and gas markets will cause a situation where the global economy will collapse and millions of people will be on the move. So be careful about making stupid mistakes, and the West should stop with its arrogance and get real for once.
Yeah, the arrogance, well, was it pride cometh before the downfall? And that's certainly what you see in this case. What the professor was talking about there is a scenario where you get to the point where Iran has use it or lose it type of moment, where they know that what is coming is a massive American response, massive airstrikes from hundreds of U.S. aircraft, thousands of American missiles, coming from aircraft, naval ships, and all these ballistic missiles they have to use them or lose them, essentially. And at that point, they engage with the American military bases in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in the UAE. Of course, the consequences there. But for the Americans, what they should focus on are these small bases we have in Iraq and Syria that then will be denied American air support. And then, of course, who are the powerful ground forces in Iraq and Syria are the Popular Mobilization Forces, the Iraqi and Syrian forces that are allied with Iran. Those American bases no longer have air cover. Those Popular Mobilization Forces can then overwhelm those bases. And now you have Americans killed in Iraq and Syria, and you have American prisoners of war. I mean, and that's just kind of one imagining of what could occur. And and then let alone what occurs next, what comes next, where do you get stability, where do you get any degree of type of a framework to walk back, and yeah, I mean the dangers in all of this, and the fact that one of the reasons, Kevin, why I believe, or why Iran acted that it did this week, multiple reasons, like anything else, certainly they have to respond to what's occurring to their allies in Lebanon, but the idea that Israel, the axis of resistance is a fist, and Israel is able, by destroying Hamas and PIG, at least degrading their military capabilities. You can't destroy them; they are a resistance to occupation. So as long as there's occupation, you're going to have resistance, and this form is Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and others. But the same thing, trying to do the same thing with Hezbollah, at least degrade their military capabilities. The Iranians just can't sit back and watch their alliance be degraded. So they had to step up, and there are other reasons as well why they stepped up this week. But, went back, I think earlier, we talked about the distraction of October 7th. And the Matt Miller was talking about agency. And, that's one of the things where the West is so arrogant. They don't allow agency for others. They believe that what they do is the history determining effect, that their big arrow movement just overwhelms everything else and nothing else matters. And I think you saw this with the Israelis trying to stir up in Lebanon a distraction from October 7th, all the things we talked about before. And what was the response? Well, within a span of 24 hours, you had Iranian ballistic missile strikes in Israel, getting through their air defense barrier very clearly. You had a shooting in Jaffa that killed 7 or 8 people. And you had, when the Israeli army went into Lebanon on the ground, they got a terrific punch in the nose. The first video that comes out of that incursion, so you could imagine being an Israeli and you hear that your soldiers have gone into Lebanon, and the first video you see of that is of your soldiers on stretchers being carried to helicopters. The second video you see is those medevac helicopters landing at Israeli hospitals. So in the span of, if my timeline's right, roughly 24 hours, you have that shooting in Jaffa, you have the ballistic missile attacks, and then you have Israeli troops getting killed and wounded. The video of them being transported back home is what you're seeing from the ground combat in Lebanon.
So we need to wrap. And one of the reasons why I need to go is not just because you have a life and I need to let you get on to the next show that you're going to be doing, but because I'm a dad and I have to go take care of my daughter here. But if you'll permit me to just say a few seconds here, she was born on September 28th. This event that has radically altered the entire world. October 7th and October 8th, I'll group together as I'll say it's about 2 days of 48 hours that have forever changed the future as far as I can tell. Feel free to push back on me if you happen to think differently. Everything that I've gone through is supposed to be happy and amazing for you as a person. And yet I cannot stop thinking about how what I am able to enjoy is because geography. If she was a brown baby in Lebanon right now, that was 1 year old, it would be terror. If she was in Gaza, she probably would not be alive at this point. The number of children under 1, what was the tally? I don't know if you have it off the top.
Over 700.
Over 700 that we know of. So it probably is safe to presume that around 1,000 babies didn't make it through their first year of life. And so I just put that out there to say that this is something that I've wrestled with. And then I'm sure there's stuff that you've wrestled with personally over the last year. Or you have a pet. You have 2 pets. Obviously we don't think of them equal to human suffering, but the ecological devastation, what's been done to animals in these countries. I'm just being fair to the experience, the human experience, the things that we all take for granted here. And these are just personal reasons why this really hits for me. And so I'll let you have the last words, but I don't live there like Rania, but I suppose very selfishly, I see a lot in this conflict that I want to end now, not just because I'm against the kind of human rights abuses, the kind of war crimes that we're seeing day to day, the live streamed massacres, as Julian Assange spoke about so eloquently when he was before the Council of Europe this past week, but, because I see in myself selfishly that it's hard to enjoy what I'm doing while this is happening. And I wish we could resolve all of this and there would be peace and we would allow everyone there to live so that I didn't feel guilty about my happiness.
Well, I would first say, first with just the numbers of the casualties, there is a letter that was sent to the White House by 99 physicians and healthcare workers who have spent time in Gaza in this last year. Their experience there totals in years when you add it all up in terms of what they've seen the last year in Gaza. And it is a very important letter to the president that everyone should read. One of the things they point out is that their estimations as healthcare workers who have been there in the last year, that the death toll, the current death toll, is at least 118,000. Based upon their professional view, their firsthand experience, the death toll has to be at least 118 currently. And that doesn't say, of course, going forward and all the effects that will cause, many more people to die, even if we were to wave a magic wand and stop the bombs and bullets right now. To your point, which is very poignant and very moving and similarly important, Kevin, about us here in the U.S., whether it's the privilege of our birthplace or just the fact that we're oceans away from them, the color of our skin, so on and so forth, the benefits of our history that, the United States was the only nation left unscathed after World War II. So our empire, we inherited everything. We took it all. And we are a wealthy nation because of that. And we're a wealthy nation because of, hey, we had slaves for how many, you're right. I mean, and as well as, those people that are here on this land, we killed them all and took their land. No wonder why we're so fabulously wealthy, right? So you look at just that perspective. But as you were saying, in terms of witnessing this current genocide and the atrocities now in Lebanon and what's to come, particularly in the lens of having a daughter, a little girl. And I would say, if I could be so bold, for those who are suffering underneath this, they will want your happiness. That is the goal of peace. That is the goal of the end of this conflict, is to realize the ability to have that joy, to have that happiness, to have that life. And I don't think anyone in Gaza or the West Bank or Lebanon would not want you to be happy, Kevin, particularly because you are someone who is working so hard to make a difference. You're working so hard to end this. You're working so hard to change our empire, to put an end to our military industrial complex, right? To put an end to this militarized foreign policy, right? So, I mean, in a sense of, be kind to yourself, be good to yourself. Don't let some emotions exaggerate others. Those emotions you have are real, and you should feel guilty. We should feel horrified. We should feel sickened and sad and grievous over what's occurring. At the same time, too, we have to respect, while we respect those emotions, we also have to recognize what we are doing ourselves, right? So all those people who've been watching this, just the fact that you're supporting Kevin and Rania, whatever else you're doing, keep doing it. And if in the end it hasn't changed anything, if in the end the wars continue and the genocides, the suffering continue, the environmental destruction continues, well, at least we all went down swinging. And that's what matters, that we fought, that we gave a damn and we fought. Because there are so many people who are enjoying the privileges here in the United States, of being in the United States, who couldn't care less. And that's, I think, for me, is the greatest horror. I tell you, I don't want to make a hierarchy out of the horrors of this, but for me personally, it's to see how people just don't care. We all have our elections in about a month from now, right? And 150 million people or so, 160 million, however many people, will vote for either Harris or for Trump. 150, 160 million Americans will affirm and condone the genocide in Gaza, the war in the Middle East. And it's just that horror, that realization of, this is our society. It's always been like this. I know this, but to live in this moment, the visceral reality of it, I think, is the hardest thing for me. And I struggle with that. But I know there are people like you. There are people like Rania. Like, I have allies, right? People who are watching this, who are listening to this, right? You're our allies. And that's how we go forward. And if we don't make a difference, hey, man, at least we go down swinging. And who did we go down for? We go down for those little girls in Palestine, those little girls in Lebanon, who are just like your daughter, and who, God help us, aren't able to enjoy their lives like your little girl.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I always appreciate talking to you. And go ahead and take a moment to tell people where they can read your work and find your commentary, because it is one of the more essential pieces of commentary that you can get if you want to understand what's happening with the U.S. empire.
Thanks for that, Kevin. Yeah, certainly on Twitter, Matthew P. Ho, P as in Patrick, last name spelled H-O-H. And then on Substack, it's Matthew Ho, at Substack or .substack or whatever on Substack. And then on my organization, Eisenhower Media Network, I'm the associate director there. You can find us, just Google Eisenhower Media Network, and a lot of other voices like mine trying to get some type of dissenting opinion from people who have this experience into our media environment.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back again soon with another show.